Thank you for joining us for our discussion on managed services. Today, you'll hear some candid talk about managed services from the experts at Cisco and Allstream. And we'll discuss an innovative new end-to-end solution called Integrated Service Management. To join our live conversation, click the chat icon at the bottom of your screen at any time during this webcast.
To get us started, let's decide on what do we mean by managed services. And Mike, I'm sure from a telecom service provider perspective, you can provide some insight. What are managed services?
Managed services is the outsourcing or outtasking of day-to-day operations as well as the governance of traditionally your network, but managed service providers today are also doing security and hosting and branching into other places.
So talking about branching into other places, so that probably means applications. So what are you actually doing with the network? Ian, what does that refer to?
Well, I think managed services can apply to just about any service an organization can consume, and we're specifically talking today about a few elements that companies may feel or decide are contextual to their business, right? So I think a lot of customers are going through this analysis of what is core to my business and what is contextual to my business, and can I take those things that are just sort of operational tasks and not necessarily really driving relevance within my company and hand them off to another expert organization to run a lot more efficiently than I can internally.
Is that one of the drivers then of managed services growth? Because we do seem to see a lot of interest in it.
More and more it's focusing back on your core competencies. So you're going to need to make the beer or manufacture what you need to do, as opposed to running a network or running a voice network is not necessarily core to what you're doing. So those are prime examples where there's a good candidate to outsource management.
I think certainly our customers are looking for the reduced CapEx and OpEx that's associated in general with managed services. They want to do so in a way that certainly does not compromise quality, performance, security in any way. And also there's probably a lot of growth in all sectors of the market, really increasing competitiveness of an organization in areas where they don't necessarily have expertise in-house.
Okay, so you mentioned some reasons, so what are the fundamental benefits then of outsourcing?
Well, I think many of them are somewhat similar to the story that we're hearing about cloud, but of course I would like to distinguish managed services from cloud in terms of the ability to address customers' concerns about risk or privacy or trust or even performance by leaving critical components on-premise in the customer's organization. Along those lines, I think there's elements of cloud, like I mentioned, like the appearance of infinite scalability, to be able to grow very quickly. Internally, an organization may not be able to roll out services as fast as a managed service provider. They need to ramp up expertise, of course, and start something new, unlike a managed service provider that already has everything built. There's also the, aside from the cost element, there is the rapid provisioning component, right, where with the click of a mouse button today you can add services or grow services or change the scale or size of a service through a managed service operation, unlike on-prem.
Okay. So overall, customers are being asked to do more with less or do more with the same resources that they have. So they need a partner in many cases to get that accomplished.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mike, you're involved in a lot of service development, with respect to managed services. What are some of the trends? Where is it actually going?
Well, right now, the service is revolving around the SLA, the service level agreements. Traditionally, that's latency jitter and packet loss across a network, but customers are expecting and looking for much more today. So they're looking for, how is my applications running over your network? Am I getting what I've paid for? And really focusing more on not building to building, but rather to the user's desktop to make sure that the user is happy at the end. So the trend is more not how is my network running, but how is my network running in context from the users sitting at their desk.
Mm-hmm. There's a perception out there, though, that managed services are really only required for large organizations that have a lot of complexity and needs for scalability. But is that necessarily true?
Well, our experience is that large and small and medium business are coming to us for sometimes slightly different reasons. The largest of the large have many, many things going on, many applications, many different types of users with different expectations. So in those cases, they'd like to focus on their customer and leave, again, the routine things to a service provider to do monitoring, to do changes, to do reporting on how the network is doing. On the other end, the small customer is very, very strapped for resources, and they may not have a choice because they may have an IT department so small. They will absolutely need to outsource those things and may not have a choice.
I think every size organization consumes IT services at the end of the day, right? And it's about how well equipped those organizations are either to jump into a project and push out a service at large scale for the large enterprise. And for the small companies, often they're looking to increase their competitiveness against the larger players. Through managed services, they get the same enterprise-grade service, whether it's 5 users or 50 or 5,000. Right?
That's a great point. I mean, it really allows smaller organizations to punch above their weight, if you will.
Exactly.
What are the customer challenges around managed services? Well, fear of outsourcing is one of them. And actually all of these challenges really, they're not just our customer challenges, but there are challenges as well. We need to, with respect to the fear of outsourcing, first off, how do we as service providers, as equipment vendors, assuage customer concerns over outsourcing?
We position ourselves as partners. So there are, again, mundane tasks that the customer may not want to do. And we look at each other as a partnership, and we'll do some things very well because we're positioned to do so. We're seeing inside the network, so we can see end-to-end as well as onto the site. So the customer often is enabled to do more with, again, the same resources that they have already.
Right, so it's not about shedding resources or jobs, it's actually helping them work better.
It enables them to do more with what they have and probably do much more than what they have to do.
I think there is a fear of outsourcing, sometimes real, sometimes perceived at multiple levels within an organization. The individual contributor level, they certainly have to be ready to change from a reactive mode to a proactive mode, but more at the sort of technical decision maker and CXO level even, there is a fear of a loss of control of privacy, a feeling of potentially being locked into the services of a single organization, and loss of the ability to innovate is always high on that list. So these are some of the issues that I think managed service providers need to answer when going into a contract with an organization, to show them that they are actually in partnership with them, as you pointed out, Mike, rather than competing with their
There'll always
internal.
be a need for IT operations. I mean, they will always have a more greater intimate knowledge of the application, how it runs, the personality, and even the expectations of the users. So there's always a role for the IT operations and IT management. It's not completely eliminated by outsourcing or outtasking managed service.
So another challenge we've got up here, planning for yesterday. So what does that mean? Mike, you touched on this a bit earlier to say that often, especially in smaller organizations, the IT staff are so wrapped up in supporting day-to-day operations and daily crises that they have very little time for thinking about the future.
Very true. So often the priorities are the priorities of the day or the priorities of the week. So often all the resources or most of the resources go to who may be screaming at any one given time. So what gets lost in that environment is long-term planning, mid-term planning, how the network should look now, how it should look today, not necessarily what behaviors do we need to do to get out of whatever trouble we're in today, but where do we want to be? Where do we want to be next month, in 6 months, in a year? That's often what's missing if the IT department is trying to do too much with too little.
When we talk to technical decision makers, we hear the recurrent theme of IT losing the ability to stay relevant to the business. When IT resources are locked in a reactive mode, troubleshooting, firefighting, solving problems every day, one of the first things you need to do is free those resources to be thinking ahead for the future, to create that business relevance to IT, to solve problems that the business doesn't know they have yet, so that IT can be ready for when they need them. So freeing up these resources by doing that core context separation and outsourcing through a managed service arrangement can be a key first step to getting there.
Absolutely, and personally speaking, I think I'd rather be doing that kind of a job than the mundane day-to-day tasks. Value for the money. So this, when a client signs up for managed services, this question is asked over and over again. They're constantly looking at the services they're getting and they're understanding, am I really realizing value from these services? How do I know that I'm getting that value? And frankly, if everything's running just fine, you're not aware of necessarily immediately, all the issues that managed services are taking away from the organization. It's only often when things go wrong that you understand and appreciate just the true value that you get out of managed services and from the outsourcing of those.
I think there's no question that it's natural for a customer to look at a monthly recurring bill that in one way is great because it's predictable month after month, but to question that, to say, am I getting my money's worth at the end of the month? Did I get X dollars worth of service in that month? I think two key points here really. One of which is the service provider needs to be reactive and responsive. The first way that will become an issue, of course, is if there are issues that aren't addressed reactively, quickly, efficiently. And so there has to be an element in the SLA to make sure that the service provider stays reactive and accountable for the solution delivery. Of course, the question of cost will always be a question in their mind, but it will be far less of an issue when services are being delivered, delivering correctly. So, of course, the biggest issue is, of course, the feeling that I've purchased too much services or that I've drastically over-provisioned my network and I'm just riding this wave of over-provisioned services. So another key element is ensuring that when customers sign up for a managed service arrangement, that they are seeing through regular reporting and sort of, I won't call it audits, but it's this trust but verify approach where a customer can confirm that a service provider has properly sized their services, can clearly show them when they need to scale by extrapolating usage charts, et cetera, on the bandwidth side for the wide area network. So knowing up front what I'm being provisioned with and how I will grow and how I know where I am throughout the duration of my contract.
Right. And then that's an option that we have, a network audit on a bi-yearly basis, biannual basis. Again, going through all the goals of the network, is it still reaching those goals? We will have the experts to pour through the data and point out where there may be a bottleneck, where there's been past troubles, and make hard recommendations to improve the network. And this needs to be done periodically because the applications will grow, the user base will grow, things will change, and the applications change in their importance.
Let's talk about talent management. And Mike, you made a point in the previous conversation there about, have I bought too much? How do I know that I've right-sized my network? And the same applies to the talent pool. Do I have the right people? Do I have the right number of people to manage my network and my IT services? And I think this is especially an issue for smaller organizations.
Smaller organizations may not be able to carry a large amount of expertise internally. We find there's a lot of integration problems between LAN and WAN, and a lot of expertise needed to get one of these networks going and running smoothly. So, as a service provider, you would want to, or we do add a deeper bench of talent. So we've seen a lot of problems before. We've seen the same things over and over and over. A lot of customers would like to dip into that talent and that bench for when they need to.
I would say that there's actually very few organizations that consistently leverage highly skilled employees to their full potential, or what they were hired for. We move from a planning phase to a design phase to implementation, often with the same resources, not taking advantage of that key knowledge base that they have, where we could take some of the, I certainly don't want to call them mundane tasks, because there are complexities that need to be managed on an ongoing basis that can roll into a managed service that allow these skilled resources that are part of the IT organization to focus on those key areas of thinking forward rather than the operational side of keeping things running.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's incumbent on us to keep up those certifications and keep investing in our talent. So we do what we're focused on, and the customer will focus on what they need to do, which is, for the most part, serving their customers and their internal customers.
Consolidation, well, that's a pretty all-encompassing term, or potentially covers a lot of ground. What do we mean by consolidation? And consolidation of networks, consolidation of equipment, data centers. It covers a wide variety of topics, and maybe a synonym for that is simplification.
There's a business case to be made, has been proven over and over, with the promise of IP. So many applications can run over one network, including voice and video, over your data network. So an investment that you have already for data can be augmented for voice and data to go over and eliminate other investments or other things that were necessary evils having multiple networks.
I think our customers are looking for simplification, as you've pointed out, and sometimes consolidation achieves that goal. The process of consolidating services onto a single component, for example, as we're doing with voice and data and potentially security and wireless on a single router, can deliver some of those efficiencies in terms of reducing number of devices to monitor, et cetera. But the process of consolidating can be complex. If a customer's approaching consolidation for the first time, they have to train their resources and go through a whole planning stage. If that's not done efficiently, then the complexities of doing so can actually erase any benefits of the consolidation in the first place. That ultimately translates to lower cost for the customer. And that is ultimately what they're looking for. So in the process of looking for managed services, we have to look at what services the customer is looking at and how best to get there.
Right, and I think then the question becomes, why are you consolidating, and what you're consolidating is going to drive the type of managed service solution that you'll choose.
Absolutely, yeah.
Consolidation, Mike. So walk me through this. What does consolidation mean from a managed network perspective?
Okay, traditionally, there's been a voice and a data network that are run separately, perhaps by two different departments or two different people at the same company. But again, that promise of IP, there's a business case to be made by having one network and putting voice over data, or even video and voice over data. So it essentially looks like the elimination of that line right to the site. And if customers that are managing themselves, they will have another router here, and they will hook up the voice and hook up the data networks to a router that they will manage themselves. And the voice over data will go through to the servers on the far side. In the case of Allstream Integrated Service Management, if we can manage everything from end to end, including managed UC solution, which is the PBX at the far side and the voice desktop telephones, we will actually eliminate the need for buying that second router and managing it. And we make the customer premise router at the edge actually very voice aware. So it knows its voice over data, and in the case if there's ever an interruption in the data service, we will call a backup to the voice and do the same at the other end where this is actually consolidated there. So this could be a very minimal circuit for 911 purpose for compliance, or it could be nearly a full trunk, and that would be to
So if something were to happen here, you still have the ability to pick up the phone and make a call.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the danger or the risk of voice over IP is mitigated by actually putting some intelligence from a managed service provider at the edge here. It's not just a voice failover, but it's also the intelligence at the end will also do auto attendant. The voicemail box can live here, as well as, again, the failover and fail back to voice over IP.
So now I've got voice and data running on the same
Right,
network.
right.
Does that, customer's next thought is going to be, well, how do I allocate the bandwidth, for the voice traffic and the data traffic?
Yeah.
If somebody sends me a large email, am I going to have, is the call going to drop?
Well, that's possible if it's not managed, to some governance models. So you want a service provider or do it yourself to do a constant test all the way from the source all the way to each phone set and back. You're injecting a test, constantly looking for the voice quality. And you do need to size everything correctly in the data network. So you have to allocate enough resources, enough bandwidth to the real-time class to make sure that there's enough reserved and the quality is already there.
But how do you know? I mean, how do you understand how much is enough, versus too much, and to ensure that quality? Is that an upfront assessment, or is that something?
It's an upfront assessment that we can do, and it's design guidelines that are actually very mature now. So we'll go by the design, but even if you've installed it, again, measure it, measure, and adjust.
Right,
to make sure the quality is there. Once you have a model set, you can add another branch, another branch, another branch, and you'll be sure of the quality up front because you've baked the model for yourself.
So consolidation, convergence, they really go hand in hand, don't
Absolutely.
they? There's consolidation of resources, of capabilities. Convergence really refers more to convergence of networks, specifically voice and data networks. what does this mean for the customer and in terms of how they approach this?
Improperly delivered, there can be issues. So there's complexity that needs to be managed by an experienced team, and that's where a managed service organization can come in and re-deliver what they've delivered many times before.
And there's always benefits, and it's an ideal model if one organization manage it from end to end. So again, if the customer was doing everything on the LAN and the service provider everything in the middle, there's an opening for finger pointing, or during a crisis, let's look this way or that way. But outsourcing or out-tasking the entire managed service end to end has its advantages, because the service provider will see right through from one side to the other and should be able to fix it quicker, faster, cheaper than doing some of this stuff at the edge by yourself.
That's right. The service provider, of course, has insight into their own core network.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And expertise at the edge now.
Right. All right, living in the cloud, and we know what we're talking about here, right? It's cloud computing, and surely you've heard of that. One thing I found, though, is outside of IT organizations, there is relatively little knowledge about what cloud is, other than, there's potentially the benefit of cost savings, right? But there's a lot of choices to be made, and a lot of questions that customers obviously have about cloud. First of all, do I pick a public cloud? There's a private cloud, hybrid cloud, which is a combination of the two. When it comes to picking a cloud provider, to think about migrating to the cloud, customers are naturally cautious. How do they know which provider to trust? Where do they know?
They may not know where to start. Or,
They may not know where to start, exactly.
Or where they'll end up.
Where they'll end up. Is it ideal to go with a public cloud because the cost savings might be there? Do I move some of my applications over to software as a service environment, or do I move everything over and go to put it on infrastructure as a service and still have some element of management and control over it, but the infrastructure itself is off somewhere and handled by an outside service provider?
When looking at cloud services, customers are looking for that cost savings, certainly. But the next big efficiency gain in cloud is about creating this appearance of infinite scalability that they can't deliver internally, and this element of very rapid provisioning. Click and a service is turned on. In the transition from managed services to cloud, managed services provides that essential stepping stone, because technology really is almost a secondary issue in the whole transition to cloud. It's all about trust and handing over accountability, or the keys to these elements within IT, to another organization. Managed services provides that critical first step, and also that critical first efficiency gain to get to that point where we can first identify the elements that are contextual to our business, elements that I'm willing to potentially outsource or out-task. And then the very next level of efficiency is, of course, moving it to a cloud where I get that scalability and rapid provisioning. So certainly we're seeing this, and it is a big question in customers' minds. How do I get there?
How do you get
and
your
who do
feet
I
wet,
trust?
too? What applications do you start with? Is it
Is it right for me?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the one thing you think about is there's a movement again to software as a service. So you don't pay for licenses that you install on a desktop. You pay subscription fees per user, and you access it through a web browser, right? And now, but when it comes to software as a service versus desktop,
Right.
I didn't have to worry about is the network connectivity actually there to the desktop to use this application? I didn't have to worry about latency.
Right.
On a desktop application, suddenly these things are, well, that's
On
actually
one
critical.
level, it's much more simple, and the economic model is much better. But also, there's another layer of complexity now to troubleshoot. So the network is the on-ramp to that cloud. So you'll need a trusted partner to work with you daily to go through any faults, any new faults, or any unpredictable or mysterious problems that arise.
That's right, and typically you're connecting to the cloud through the internet, and that obviously that brings to mind security. How do I secure? It's not so much the security within the cloud, because there's technology there to ensure proper segmentation of different environments, but it's between the cloud and my environment, on the network. How do I ensure that I'm connecting to it securely? And then, as you touched on, there's the reliability and then the network performance aspect.
I think it's a great point, because there's a lot of customers out there that are using cloud, just may not fall under their definition of what it is. MPLS networks that customers have been using for many, many years now is cloud in many respects, right? There are multiple customers sharing infrastructure, and security is maintained. We're talking about kind of the same issues here. So this is well-proven technology. Certainly, as you mentioned, security can be delivered at all levels of a cloud-based solution and a managed services-based solution. So it's something that many customers are probably already doing without realizing it.
Mm-hmm. And it's, these are the things, if you can address the security issue, if you can address issues of bandwidth and performance and capacity and reliability, then maybe then customers will start to trust the service providers a little more. That's when we get who can you trust? Can you deliver on those three things: security, reliability, and performance in the network? Okay, so finally, selecting a service provider. We've talked about a lot of the benefits and the pros and cons of managed services and the issues that customers want to address. But when it comes down to it, why don't customers necessarily trust service providers? Why are they afraid to move key business applications and infrastructure to a managed services provider? Why are they afraid to let go?
One major objection may be loss of control or a perceived loss of control, either for an individual incident or for long-term direction.
Yeah, I think there's a few big ones from the customer's eyes. One is this loss of the ability to innovate. One is feeling trapped with a single vendor's solution and the inability to move to other solutions if they choose to down the road. I think there's the other issue that we touched on earlier, which is always wondering if they could provide the same service for less money later on themselves with internal resources. And that's where the ongoing proof and validation that the service they subscribe to is delivering them the maximum value. There's also sometimes this feeling that they're subject to aggregate change windows, that multiple customers are piled onto the same solution that their system is running on. So the reassurance that a solution is unique to them and they have the flexibility that they have today and the access they need to see the value that they're getting.
So not being jammed into a one-size-fits-all kind of framework.
Right.
And we've talked about people. I think people are a really important element of managed services. Obviously, there's, from the customer standpoint, they want to understand again that we've got skilled people
Around the
looking
clock.
after it, right? 24/7, of
Right.
course. Certifications.
Certification, and importantly, is that access to expertise. So, you want to line up your guru with the guru on the side of the service provider, and always attack any problem with the right amount of expertise that you need, and make sure it's available.
I think any managed service arrangement, customers have the perception that they're going to lose the ability to innovate. So if a service provider in a managed service arrangement can demonstrate flexibility to allow a customer to continue to innovate in the way they do today, it would be a significant decision point as well.
Absolutely. And then that leads to, I think, to process, that we don't want to lock the customer into a box because our processes are inflexible, right? And
Yeah, well, to manage a network, specifically a network, you do need some discipline. So quite often we'll put forward a disciplined approach to and some formality to the processes for change, for incidents, for escalation. And it has its benefits over the long run in stability. And you look at it, we're in the stability business, keep everything running in tip-top shape.
And I think obviously another important element of this is trusting your provider, looking under the hood. What does the network look like? And we tend to think of network and connectivity as being a commoditized business, with managed services really to differentiate it. But not all networks are built the same, right,
True.
Mike?
You need a commitment to quality and growth. Approached for growth and a long-term roadmap of services. So yes, look under the hood, look at if it's a national network by a national provider, your customers and your internal users will be cross-country. You need to keep a even level of service across the country.
I think looking under the hood also goes both ways, right? So as a customer, I'd be wanting a service provider who is willing to understand my business, to look under the hood of my own operation where it makes sense and where it's, again, already identified to be contextual to my business, to develop a solution that truly meets my needs.
And I suppose the final criteria in selecting a service provider is proof. If we talked about approach, people, process, network, and all these great things about managed services, but in the end, the customer is going to ask, am I getting value for my money? How can I prove that my service provider is actually delivering or will deliver on what they say they are?
Yeah. So before you buy, I obviously look under the hood and look for those reports. Look for the continuous measurement. Look for results in other enterprises of your size.
This is, I think, the whole trust but verify approach that many customers take. They don't want to just throw the keys entirely to another organization to run a service that they used to run. They want that ongoing, call it what you will, a quarterly business review that shows how the service has been running, the sort of the extrapolated usage charts that says, we have sized you right for today, but here is when we predict you're going to need growth, as opposed to being over-provisioned for the entire time and obviously overspending early in the process. So it's that ongoing review and interaction between the provider and the customer that validates the solution.
It's not just a matter of, you're spitting out a report online and here, look, we met our objectives this week. It's like, okay, what does this report mean?
Yeah. It's
Right?
the interpretation. It's the demonstrated value through interpretation.
That's right.
So validate the original goals of the network, validate today's goals of the network, compare your roadmap of the service provider with your own goals
Exactly.
and your future plans.
Things change every day, right?
Thank you for watching and for your participation in the live chat. We'll keep the chat open for the next half hour to answer any additional questions you may have.